Hi everyone, Jonathan here. Quite an unusual one to show you today. I know we say this quite often, but this is really cool. This is the Veselý V42. Let's just prove that fact. It's written on the side, it's always helpful, just in case you forget. V42. However, even more exciting than this really nice bit of firearms history is this. This unassuming haversack is what it was called. And you can probably guess that it does in fact contain a gun. And that gun is the V43, which is the paratrooper version of the V42. Incidentally, Forgotten Weapons have a really good information page with reproduced manuals and things on the V42, V43. Check that out. What it doesn't include is this, so we're doing a deep dive on this one today. First item out of the mystery haversack, not so mystery now that I've spoiled it for you, is a butt. And in fact, the compartment that it came out of is labelled butt. Out of the compartment labelled body, we get, so this is British nomenclature for receiver, essentially. This section here. And we can snap those together very neatly, like that. I'm clearly not under fire as a paratrooper the time I'm taking to do this. We have a sling attached to the barrel. And as you probably guessed, that also, series of interrupted threads here, that also snaps into place. Or not. I have attempted to attach this the wrong way around. You have to attach it with the sight off to the right. Then you can press down, press the catch, turn, and it locks in. So not very slick from me there, but a trained paratrooper could do this very quickly. And then we want to attach our sling, which we can also do depending on how short the sling is. There we go. So that's ready to go. And the final item in here, now there's space for two of these, or more actually, potentially. So we'll show you the haversack in a bit of detail up close, but let's get to the gun. And here is our magazine. Very unusual, as you will have seen on the V42 already. Very deep, or wide, depending on the dimensioning, the dimension you're talking about, front to back. The width front to back of the magazine is very wide for what is a 9mm parabellum submachine gun, or machine carbine in British terminology. The last thing, well, nearly the last thing to do to make this ready to fire is to flip up our sight, which is protected in this really neat sheet metal housing, completely out the way. In a pinch, you could just shoot this thing with just the front sight or from the hip or whatever. But for proper aiming, you press down. You can see what I'm doing there. Press down with your finger and it will flip up 100 meters and then flip it around for 200. So 100, 200, and stowed, basically. Quite a neat sight. Simple notch, like a pistol sight. Heavily protected foresight, which is always good. And as you've seen from both guns, beautifully finished. These are prototypes, as I'm sure you've gathered, and they have been really nicely finished overall, actually. You wouldn't normally do that to military firearms because it's a very time-consuming, expensive process. But when you're trying to sell a design to a military, apparently you do. So I showed you the V42's markings. Let's just show you that this is in fact a V43. Great to have the sling on this, of course. It does get in the way a bit for, demonstration purposes. Other markings while we're at it, we've got VAP marked on the tubular section there. I'm not entirely sure what that stands for. Veselý is the V, presumably automatic pistol, but that's a bit of an unusual turn of phrase for what this is. Machine pistol is uncommon. Automatic pistol doesn't really mean that in English, and didn't then either. So it could be armament production, because this is the name of the company as well, VAP Holdings, that was set up to actually sell these things, essentially. More on that a bit later. There's one feature that we haven't covered. You might have spotted it. Almost makes it, this whole thing almost could be a Star Wars gun. The more I look at it, it's only just occurred to me. But we have a latch up here in front of the sight protector. And if we pivot that, we have to push it in. Push in from the right, pivot it that way, and then it unlocks what is obviously a bayonet. Little spike bayonet, again, beautifully finished. That's probably the nicest finished bayonet I've ever seen, short of a plug bayonet or something from back in the day. And the attachment system is this notch in the barrel. So you slip it back over its own barrel, and there's a locating pin in the bottom there, so you know that it's this arrangement, and you flip the catch around and it pops out this side, and it's now locked in the other way around. Pretty neat, actually. I'd better take it back off so I don't stab myself. I don't think Royal Armouries Health and Safety would be too impressed with me if I did that. And blood's really bad for historical objects made of metal, so that's safely back on. Pretty unobtrusive, pretty good design for a submachine gun bayonet, if a submachine gun bayonet is something you're wedded to having. What else have we got on here? Controls. So you saw the disassembly catch there. That's only on the V43. There is a disassembly bolt here that, if we have time, I will pop out and we'll have a look at the inside of the gun. So the disassembly catch here, that's on both variants. I say both variants. The V series goes back to the original V40 design that was submitted to the British War Office originally, and it was iterated through 41. The differences are, we have a drawing, we have some drawings that show you some minor differences. They're pretty similar, and the number's rolling up every year that a new version is coming out. So there's V40, V41, then they don't go anywhere. The 42 and 43 are the standard and paratrooper variants that a few are made of, that are then, well, something happens to those that we'll finish up with. And that's kind of, I think there might have been a V44 even as well. And then safety is, well, there's a pull-out cocking handle on the earlier version of this. We actually have 5 of these things, and on an earlier one, there is in fact a push-in, pull-out cocking handle, a bit like a modified Sten, to lock the bolt in the forward position. This doesn't have it, so that means they've done away with that later, presumably because this safety selector was good enough. So it goes from semi-automatic, which is where it is at the moment, to, and it's incredibly stiff, bearing in mind this is hardly used probably, this one. Very, very stiff. There we go. To the safe position, which is in the middle. I'm never sure about a safety position that's in the middle of the 2 dangerous positions, but that's just me. And then all the way forward for automatic fire. So that's really all you need to worry about. Of course, you need to cock the thing, because it works off an open bolt, like most submachine guns. So in other words, it fires from this position, bolt comes forward, strips around off, chambers it and fires it, and comes back to this position. You probably all know that by now. But this is where it gets really interesting, because if I pop off the magazine, what looks like a sort of, I don't know, intermediate rifle caliber magazine is actually a double column pistol cartridge magazine. So a column in the front and a column in the back, and it's feeding from one and then the other through a really very ingenious design. Now, the best way to demonstrate this is with a couple of inert rounds. These are inert. Now, the usual getting ahead of myself situation here, because you're going to be seeing how very difficult this magazine is to load, but we'll do it on camera. So you do have to sort of push in and down. It's not too bad, at least just for the one round in the rear column, but there are accounts from the trials that this was a pain to load, and I think it's to do with this sprung component where the tip of my finger is that sort of helps to guide this rear cartridge. Well, I say don't forget, you don't necessarily know yet, but this cartridge has to jump the gap of this empty front column. So you have to have positive control of the cartridge somehow without so much resistance that it doesn't move easily. Hopefully this will become clear when I show you how this works. And then the front, so imagine we've filled this all the way up, 60 rounds total. So that's very easy. This front, it's a weird combination of Sten-like dual column single position feed on the rear and Thompson-like or something Uzi-like double column double position feed on the top. Weird hybrid. And it's really quite strange to see these two rounds queued up one behind the other. Now you've probably picked up on the fact that this single position feed on the rear means you're going to have fewer rounds in the rear column. And if you did, you're absolutely right. 29 rounds in this rear half of the magazine. Really, it's 2 magazines in one body, if that makes any sense at all. And then 31 rounds in the front for a total of 60. So the V40 actually had 32 rounds in each column. So it must have had a different magazine design that we can't show you. So this is the fully developed version. Let's demonstrate how it works. And it does work surprisingly well. I know what you're thinking. The bolts coming in from the rear, I'll show it that way around so you can see the rounds. The bolts coming in from the rear, how is it not hitting the rear round first and just driving them both into an immediate double feed? That's what would happen. Well, there is a really clever system here, and it's built into the magazine well, or the magazine housing. You might have spotted the suspicious bulge here. Now, you probably can't see up through the magazine well, but if I can feel a tab in there, and if we pull back the cocking handle, I should hopefully, we may have to get a camera in and show you this, but there is this tab here. It's like a finger that is pushing down on this rear column of rounds all the time until such time as the follower is able to rise on the front column and actuates a little lever that pulls that finger out of the way. It's going to make more sense if I just run this magazine of 2 rounds through the gun dry, I hope. So we'll try to capture it going in. Now that is a safety position. This is a 2-position magazine, a bit like the Webley self-loading pistol we showed you some weeks back, where the first stop, the rounds are actually clear of the bolt entirely. So there's not only is there not going to be a double feed, there's not going to be a feed of any kind. That's a safety position. I'm not really sure why they wanted that, because it means you have to press the magazine catch and push the magazine all the way in. And in the trials, there's actually an account of problems with the magazine from the trial soldiers not wanting to press the magazine catch in to shove the mag all the way in. They're literally just slapping it in and overriding the catch to get it all the way in, and that causes stoppages, problems. Anyway, that's taking us a little bit off the point. You can just about see through the ejection port that there are the 2 rounds in there. Now, if you can see into there, you should be able to see that the rear round has been pressed down by that metal finger that I was talking about. Let's just drop the mag, and you might see it as it comes in. there's a bit of resistance, and it's pushing down the rear column. So, magazine fitted, bolt to the rear ready to fire, pull the trigger, feeds the first round in, bearing in mind the rear round is, the whole column is being pressed down by that metal finger. Bolt then blows back, ejects what would be an empty case, and then bolt comes forward again. We've fired our front column of rounds, and it's fed the first round off the rear column because that's now been let up into the feedway to feed the next shot, and sure enough, that's fed fine. So with 2 inert rounds, this functions absolutely fine. Whether it would at this stage fire all 60 rounds flawlessly, I don't know, but in trials it performed really well. It actually outperformed the Sten Mark II somewhat in a couple of areas. Similar accuracy, better in sand and mud on at least one of the trials that was carried out. Now the Sten, of course, made to a price point, to say the very least. This thing is a sort of hand-fettled, workshop-built prototype, so with enough time you would expect it to do better. But it is a new and unproven design. So, Veselý. This is Josef Veselý. He is a Czech refugee, not the only one to flee to the UK due to the Nazis, who also gets into, well, he's already in arms design. He's working at the Skoda works back home. Some sources even claim, in fact, some in the War Office seem to have somehow been convinced that he invented the Bren gun. He did not invent the Bren gun. I don't know where that idea came from. He may have worked on the program when he was over there, but yeah, he's not one of the designers of the Bren gun. However, he's clearly a talented chap and goes to work for the Birmingham Small Arms Company, BSA, sorry, and also does design work for the D&E department, now based at Cheshire. So that's the design development department, formerly at Enfield, moved out of Enfield for the duration of the war to Cheshire. So he's doing sort of development work there. This is not part of that. This is a private venture that he does, but he does rope BSA in, and they make the guns for trials. One trial alone uses 6 guns, so I think I can confidently say that there are at least a dozen of these produced in this, probably to this same really nice standard. And they go through quite an unusual series of trials, like multiple trials. Normally we see weird stuff like this comes in, it gets a cursory test and evaluation from someone in the military or the War Office, and it gets ignored, usually because there's a war on, or because it's maybe not ready for the prime time, or because it's completely mad. Well, this isn't any of those things, actually. There are trials through, well, it's first officially brought in 1943 to the attention of the War Office, and then there are trials in 44, all the way through to 45, impressively. So they're not saying no, but on the basis initially of having the Lanchester, and in fact, Veselý himself is quite bitter about the dismissive attitude of one Colonel Shepherd of the Shepherd and Turpin Sten fame. So that Veselý is assuming that Shepherd is dead set against his new gun because they're already working on the Sten from 1941. Now there's truth to that insofar as the Sten is a design that we've kind of committed to. The Royal Navy already has the Lanchester as well. We don't really need another 9mm blowback submachine gun, especially not one that is, shall we say, in modern British military terms, on the Gucci end of the spectrum. This is not a wartime design. In fact, the armament design establishment Belgian section, interestingly, so these are other refugee designers critiquing a Czech counterpart of theirs, they actually say that that he has designed a deluxe blowback machine carbine with more numerous and complicated parts than, say, a Sten. Too many for a simple blowback in wartime. It even would be so in peacetime, they say. And then they claim that it's been designed without regard to expense, which is a bit damning, really. So it's a beautiful gun, but it's the wrong timing. And that's regardless of this complicated slightly heavier system of the magazine. But that's actually the reason that the War Office remain interested in this thing right the way through until at least mid-1945, when they finally draw a line under it and say, we close this investigation off. They're fascinated by this magazine system. And in fact, the Royal Navy, because we've got different branches of the military trialling this, that's why there are so many different trials, I think. And I think it's the Royal Navy who suggests that this technology should be applied to the Lanchester that they already have. So that's a possibility and an alternate timeline that Veselý's very clever front and rear column magazine design could have been adapted to other cheaper designs, and we could have seen it actually see use. In the event, we did not see use at all. The basic gun design, as neat as it is perhaps overly long. It's quite a long barrel for a submachine gun. And indeed this very cool but complex magazine design. None of it is adopted by anybody, and poor Veselý is foiled. Initially by that Sten Lanchester 1-2 punch, and then in 1945 it's because of the Patchett machine carbine that's already being trialled and is already being recognised as a likely successor to the Sten. So he never really stood a chance. But there is a really interesting sort of side story to this involving a company called British Graphitized Metals, who came in to sponsor, to fund this project. So BSA are making the guns, but this other company are actually bankrolling the whole thing. You can't make something like this without significant expense. And there's a bizarre connection with MI5, because a guy who even demonstrates this thing for one of the military a military demonstration to try to sustain interest. He is actually one of the MI5 double cross agents, as they were known. So he is there to feed information to the Nazis that is deliberately either wrong or not of as much value as it might appear, to try to get information back in his double agent role as a Nazi agent. So he's on our side. We know he's a double agent, that kind of double agent. And he is not the president of the company, but he is one of its sort of noted employees. And he's being used to spy on the director of British Graphitized Metals, who is a foreign national that MI5 is suspicious of. And at one point, there's even a plan to leak the plans of this to the Nazis. So this could have contributed to the war effort indirectly, but they don't actually follow through with the plan. And this guy is absolutely fascinating. In the course of researching this video, I found a whole book on him, which I recommend you dig out. His name was Christopher Lestrange Metcalf, which is a suitably wacky name for a spy. And the book is Double Agent Balloon by David Tremaine. Now, I was in a rush. I only found the Google preview of that, but it looks like the book is well worth a read. And a whole chapter is to do with this, the financing and intrigue around this gun and this Dickie Metcalf. So despite that litany of names, his nickname was Dickie, some sort of British humour going on there. He was also a racing driver, a court-martialed British Army officer who was desperate. He was in this whole setup to try to get his commission back in the Army. And although this gun went nowhere, he did eventually get his British Army commission back in 1945. So nice one, Dickie, I suppose. Thanks so much for watching, guys. As always, you can come and visit one of our 3 museums here in the UK, but if you can't do that, we have our digital options. We have Facebook, Twitter and Instagram that you can check out. Worth keeping an eye out for any upcoming events on there. And you can still donate to us if you'd be so kind as to do that. We will have a link in the description. But whatever you do, we really appreciate you watching, and we'll see you again next week.